Hi, and welcome to the second part of my tutorial, where I am teaching you how you can make a Disney.com landing page clone only using pure CSS and HTML. This is the second part, and in the first part we made a mobile version for this web page. In this part we are going to make the web page fully responsive. So if that sounds interesting to you, then tune in, take a cup of coffee, and let's get down with this. Also, I would like to say that I am going to post content just like this, tutorials, and documenting my progress on learning to code full stack web development. So if you want to follow along with me and learn to code, then it would really make my day if you were to smash that subscribe button and be one of my very first subscribers. Okay, so starting off, if we look at the web page, the first change that the official Disney.com web page does is that it changes the buttons from one column into one row. And it does this change at about 550 pixels of viewport width. So we're going to start with doing that. And to do that, I am simply going to put a Flexbox container around the boxes, and then I'm going to change flex direction whenever the screen width surpasses 550 pixels. So let's do that. I'm going to jump into VS Code right where we left off, and I'm going to go to the buttons right here. I'm now going to add a new container, and I'm going to call it button flex container. And then I'm going to take these two lines of code and I'm going to move them up. I'm now going to jump into my CSS style sheet, and I'm going to scroll down, and then I'm going to do button flex container, and I'm going to do display of flex, and then flex direction column. Okay, so now we have it just like we want to, and now I'm just going to add a media query, media screen, and I'm going to do min width of 550 pixels. And then I'm going to, inside of the media query, select my button flex container and change the flex direction to row. And now if we surpass 550 pixels, we should see that the buttons change. And we also need to do some adjustment to the width. Okay, right now, so if we look at the buttons, we can see that the width has changed. So what we need to do is that we have to set a specific width in pixels, because right now the width is set to 60%, which makes it so that it sets it to the Flexbox container, but we just want to have them at a solid size, so I'm just going to set it to 200 pixels, and I think we want it a bit longer. I'm going to do 250. Okay, that looks about right. I'm just going to make it a bit smaller. So now if we surpass 550 pixel, we should see that the buttons change to a row-based layout. Now we probably also want to very quickly fix this image, because I see that it also increases a lot with size, and we want it to have it at a fixed size, just as we can see at the official Disney.com webpage. So I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to find my image. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have a specific selector for the image, so I'm just going to do, let's see. If we look right here, the image that we want to select is this one. So I'm going to do an attribute selector, and I am just going to I'm just going to select that. So I'm going to do image, and then I'm going to copy paste this in, and then I'm going to do width of 300 pixels, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's too small. Let's do 500. Yeah, that looks much better. Okay, and then the next thing we need to change is these two images right here at the bottom. As we can see at the official web page, if we scroll down, then when we surpass about 650 pixels, they change to a bigger image. So you can see that it kind of crops off here right around the castle, and then just as we pass through that, then it changes it so that now it's a bigger image. So we are going to jump into our images. So we have our Disney cards right here. And what we are going to do is that we are going to add a source set attribute to our images. Now a source set is basically a set of different images that the web page or the browser can select depending on some certain properties. The one that we are mostly going to concern ourselves with is the viewport width. So it can change the image based on the width, so to speak. So I'm going to type in source set, and I'm going to start by typing in this original one. And I am going to type in that it should be that we should use this image up until a width of 650. And then I'm going to do the same thing where I am going to instead select the big image, and then we're going to just type in .jpeg, and now we want this to be, I'm going to type in up until 3000 W. And now we should see in our web page that when we increase our viewport width, it changes the image. And now we will have to do some further editing, but before we do that, I'm first going to change the other image too. So we can go in here and we can just repeat the same thing. Okay, and now we have both of our images, and now they have been properly scaled down. And then what we now want to do is that we want to make sure that these images also scale up so they take up the entire width of the page. And so to make sure that they scale properly, we are just going to jump into the CSS. We are going to look up the selector, and we're going to add a width of 90 VW, and now it should properly scale. And now the next thing that we need to fix are the Disney cards, Disney Plus cards. So as you can see, when we make the image around 650 pixels, then it changes from a column to a row. So we also need to do the same thing that we did with the buttons before, where we use the Flexbox container and flex direction to change that. Okay, so to make sure that we change this into a row, we need to add a Flexbox container around these two, just like we did with the buttons. So I'm going to do .card Flexbox container, and then I'm going to select my cards, and I am going to move them up, just like that. And then I'm going to see how it looks like. Cool. Now I'm going to select my .card Flexbox container, and I'm going to do a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and now let's see. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm also going to do a gap of 1em. Okay, and now in my media query, I'm going to add in my car.flexbox container right here, and we should see that it very nicely changes, although there are some scalability issues that we need to fix. Okay, so now if we look, we can see that it changed it to a row, but there is some problems with the width here, so I'm going to just quickly change that. So I'm going to do card and width of 50%, and now they have the same width, but the image here is another height. So as you can see, they changed the image here to the same image, but with a different aspect ratio. So I'm just going to quickly add it in here with source set. Okay, and now I have added in this image, and I'm going to check, and as you can see, it has changed it, and now it lines up perfectly. Okay, so now at 800 pixels around, some serious shit is starting to happen. So the first thing that happens is that the menu pops up. So we're going to start by adding that, and then we're going to delete this image, and then we're instead going to set the background image of this, and we're going to do the same here with the Boba Fett image, and we're also going to change this image. But let's just start with the menu. So in the HTML markup, we actually added this menu, but we disabled it. If we just look right through here, in the beginning, we can see that it has a display of none. So we're just going to jump right back to our media queries, and I'm going to add a new one. and I'm going to do screen and minimum width of 800 pixels. And now I'm going to select the list elements. So I'm going to do dev.nav menu lia, and I'm going to do display of inline. And let's see. And as we can see, they all pop up here. And now I'm going to jump into my nav menu, and I'm going to do justify content flex.start, and all the items going to line up here. And then I'm going to add some more gaps, so I'm going to add a gap of 2em, and I'm going to add a margin.left of 2em also. Let's look at that. Yes, and that looks like a great start. And now we gotta change this image. So we have to change this image just right here at a little bit earlier than 800 pixels. I think around 790, about something right there. That is when the image reaches its maximum size. I'm just going to quickly adjust that to 790 pixels. And then I am going to select that image using the image attribute selector. And I'm going to select it within my media query. And I am going to set the display of none, so that the image is now hidden. And then I'm instead going to set a background image, so I'm going to select Encanto, and I'm going to set a background image of .jpeg. And now we have the image here, but we have some scalability issues because we want the image to scale very properly, and that it maintains its proportions, that the entire container stays around those proportions, and that the image grows and is always fully contained. So I'm going to start with adding a background size of contain, and we're going to see that there is a lot of stuff that we need to fix here. Okay, so to start, if we were to increase the width of our viewport, we can see that the image repeats, which we don't want. So I'm going to set background repeat to no repeat. And now we can instead see that it changes to empty space, which we don't either want. So we want to increase the image height relative to the viewport width. And so after having done some playing around, I can see that it is around 40% of the viewport width that this relationship lies. So we can see that there is some empty space here, so we could add a bit more, 42, it will fill in, and then 43. And now we can see that the image just fits perfectly, and that it always scales just with the viewport. And just to be sure, we could also add cover, and that way we make sure that the image always will cover the entire container, that there will be no empty space. Okay, so now we want to align all the content here so that it sits correctly and not on top of the host, because we want to be able to see that and have the content here. So I'm going to start with adding a border of 2 pixel solid cyan, just to help visualize things. So you can see that we have our box here. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add a display of flex, and then justify content flex start so that it ends up here, and then align item so that it is centered, and then some margin to the left so that it comes up, so that it doesn't sit exactly at the edge. So I'm going to do just that. Display flex, justify content, flex start, and then align items center. And now it sits about here. And then we also want to add some padding so it doesn't sit right at the edge. Okay, much better. But now it also is kind of on top of the image, which we don't either want. So we need to make sure that it is properly sized. And we can see that the buttons here are changed back to a column. So we're going to start by doing that just as we changed the buttons here before. So I'm going to go into .button flex container and set the flex direction of column. And now it changes back, and I think we need to make the image a bit smaller, so I'm going to go into the image, and I'll select the image with an attribute selector, just as I have done with the other images. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to jump right into here, and then booyah, and then width of 200 pixels. Let's try that. That's too small. I did 400 last time. Let's do 350. And I noticed that the image scales with the viewport width, so as it gets larger, the image also gets larger. So to do that very easily, we could go into our Encanto content and we could set a width of 40 viewport width so that it scales with the viewport. And then instead of using a pixel measurement, we could use a relative unit like 100%. So it scales 100. So it takes up 100% of the width of its parent, which is 40 viewport widths. So it takes up 40% of the viewport width. And then we could also add a max width so that it doesn't get like how big, like infinitely big. So we could add a max width of say 600 pixels. And as we can see now, it should scale properly with as the viewport gets larger, but at a certain point it will just stop at this width instead of getting any larger than that. Okay, so now we will look at making this section. And firstly, I noticed I forgot this new on Disney. Okay, so now we're getting started with this section. And firstly, I noticed that I missed this new on Disney Plus right here. So I'm just going to quickly add that in. And I'm also going to add a styling of font weight 400. Cool, and then margin the top, and let's just do 2M. That's way too much. 1M. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so we gotta do the same thing with the image. So I'm going to start by deleting this image. So I'm going to scroll down to my media query right here, and then I'm going to select the image. So with an attribute selector, I'll look it up just like before. And then I'll jump right back into my code, and now that we've selected it, I'm going to set the display of none. So now we remove it. Okay, and now we firstly want to make a new div around our content that we want to be. So I'm going to start by adding a parent container, and I'm going to make it Boba Fett background image. Then I'm going to add another one to make it Boba Fett content. Then I'm going to move everything up. And then I'm going to fix the styling. And now if we look, we have this. So I'm going to add the same styling that I had here before. BG image, I think was the class. Let's see, Boba Fett BG image, but we'll have to add a period too. And now we have destyling, but we also want to change the image. So I'm going to do Boba Fett background image, background URL, and then image, Boba Fett poster, and also I'm going to do background image just for consistency. And now we have this background image right here. And then I'm going to go into Boba Fett content. And I'm going to add a width of 40%. And now it looks pretty good. And we also want to make sure that it has some gap. So gap of 1M. If we add a display of flex first and flex direction of column. And then we also want to do align items center. Okay, cool. That's a bit too much spacing though. And also we don't need the H1 tag that we don't want there. Okay, cool. And we can make it probably just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go into change it to 50%. And that looks a bit better. And now we're going to just fix the image so that also displays correctly. Okay, so fixing the image. So I'm going to start with selecting the image. And then I'm going to set the background size to contain. Now we will see what that looks like. And we can see that we need to add some more height. So I'm going to set the height to, or no, sorry, the reverse. It's too much height, so we need less height. So I'm going to try 36. And that's too much. I'm going to do 30, too little I meant. I'm going to do 38. And we need a bit more. Let's try 39. Okay, I'm going to do 38.5. Okay, let's just look how that scales. And it looks like it looks like the container doesn't take up the full width of the parent container. So I'm going to change the width to 100%. And now it seems to be displaying properly, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so the next thing we want to change is this image right here. We want to change this image for this other one. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we've done previously. So I'm going to start by selecting that image. So I'm going to the shop and then I am going to select that image right here. Going to my style sheet, go down, and then I'm going to do image, select that one, and then a display of none. Okay, so I have to remove that image, and instead I'm now going to select this entire section, and we're going to need to add two divs right again. So I'm going to add mimi dot background image, and then dot mimi dot content, mimi pig, so to speak. Then I'm going to take all of this content and I'm going to put it inside of the div right there. And then I want to make sure that it also has align items on center so that everything is centered. So I'm going to go into mimi.content and I'm going to align. I'm going to do display of flex and then flex direction, going to be column, and then align items of center. And let's see if that will work. Okay, cool. Now it finally works, and we also want to make sure that there is some margin there. So I'm just going to quickly put that in. Okay, right, now we're back right where we want to be. And now I am going to add a background image. So I'm going to go right here. Then I'm going to select .mimi.bg image. And you know what, I'm just going to add this to the default styling. So I'm going to do .mimi.bg image. And then I'm going to go down here. Then I'm going to do again .mimi.bg image. And then I'm going to select background image URL. And I'm going to select this to the image that I want. And the image that I want is Mimi Pig Big. And now we should see that it displays here. Also, we want to set the width to 100%. And I think that setting the width to 100% is something that we want on each of these containers. So I'm just going to go and set it on everything so that I make sure that it's all displaying to 100%. So I'm just going to do width 100%. So that's a bit less code. Then we want to align this to flex.end. So I'm going to do display flex and then justify content flex end. And we want to make sure that this content aligns to the right. So I'm going to do align items flex.end. Okay, cool. Now it aligns to the right. And we want to add some margin to the right too. So I'm going to add it right into here. So I'm going to do padding right 2M. That's a bit too much. I'm going to do 1M. Okay, that looks better. And also we want to make sure that the image scales properly. So I'm going to change the background size to contain. And we see that there's a lot of extra height that we want to remove. So I'm going to try setting the height to 34 viewport widths. Let's see, let's do 33. There's a little space there, it's very hard to see. I think if I do background color of plum, it's probably easier to see. Yeah, we have it right there. So let's do 34. Or I meant we want to do less, so we'll do 32. And now there's a bit too much there, so 52.5. And yeah, that looks good. Now we can change this to cover. And I think we'll just add some little bit more padding. I'm going to do 1.5. And okay, I think that looks just all right. Okay, and then another thing we want to do is to make sure that we only display 2 movies here, because as we see at this size, it only displays 2 images. So we could go into, so I'm just going to set movie 3 to display of none. So I'm going to go right into here, and I'm going to do dot movie 3 of display none, semicolon, and we have our 2 images here. Very nice looking. And then next up, if we look at these 2 movies, if we scale it up to around 1000 pixels, then we can see that it changes to 3 images instead. So I'm going to fix that. So I think it was, let's see, the breakpoint is about 960 pixels. So I'm going to add another media query. Min width of 960 pixels. And I'm going to select dot movie 3. I'm going to do display of inline, and then I'm going to select dot movies, and I'm going to do justify content of flex dot start. Then I'm going to select each movie, and I'm going to decrease the width to about 20%. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks about right already. I think that's pretty much perfect. And then the next thing we want to change is the buttons right here, because as we see, they change back to row. Right here around, let's see, 1230 pixels. So I'm also very quickly going to add that in. So I'm going to select it, and it will be button flex container and flex direction of row. Okay, let's check it. Nice. Okay, now everything kind of looks nice, but as you can see, if you were to take that the inspector mode away, you can see that it has a lot of space here between. And if we were to take the space away here, we could see that it basically goes out to all of the edges. So we're going to fix that. So I've wrapped everything around a Flexbox container called container. So now we can very easily, if we were to quickly access our container, we could set a max width of about 1600 pixels, I think. And it should probably downscale. Well, that looks quite good. Now we also need to do some resizing with the images to make sure that the images also work well on this very specific Flexbox container width. Okay, so if we look here, we have some weird behavior going on right here. As we can see, this does not line up right here, and these images also overflow, so we need to fix that. So we're going to our display post dash content ID, and we're also going to add shop to it, so that it adds up here. Then we have some padding here that we also want to get rid of. So I'm going to go to my shop, and I am going to remove my padding, and now it will line up properly. And then we need to fix these images. So if we go to Mickey Mouse and girl, I'm going to change this to 100% instead of viewport widths, and now they should fit into their container. Now the next thing we want to change is this image, because we want it to scale properly, because as you can see it looks good, but then as soon as we reach 1600 pixels, then things start getting weird because things no longer scale. So we need to add another media query specific for 1600 pixels. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to do media screen and minimum width of 1600 pixels. And then I'm going to select my image, and I'm going to do and then I'm going to do a background size of contain. And then we will see that there is a lot of excessive height. So I'm going to change the height to, let's try 38 viewport widths. And it's too much, so I'm going to do 36. And that looks pretty much perfect. And then we can change, then we can take away this. And now this image is properly scaling. And we need to do the same thing with this image. So I'm going to do .Boba Fett background image. And I'm going to select background dash size. And I'm going to set it to contain. And then height. I'm going to try 32.5 viewport width because it recommended that. And hey, it's actually looking pretty good. Let's do 31. Okay, that's too much. 31.5, 32, 32. I'm going to do 32.3 just because I can. Okay, and then I'm going to change this. And then we also need to do the same thing with this image. So I'm going to select .mimi background image, and I'm going to set background size to contain, and then height I'm going to try 30 viewports widths. And also I'm going to set background color so we can properly see to plum solid, or plum solid. We don't need that. Okay, and we see that it's way too much. I'm going to change to 25, and that pretty much looks perfect. Yeah, 25 looks good. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this, and now that looks good. And then we also want to fix this because these cards are massive, and as we can see, at around 960 pixels they change from one column to a row, so we want to change that too. So if we go into our cards right here, I'm going to add one container for my cards. So I'm going to say Disneyland cards, and then I'm going to select them and move them up into my div. And then I'm just going to make sure that everything looks properly. And I'm going to do some adjustments. So I'm going to just jump up, and I'm going to set .disneyland dash cards. I'm going to do border of 3 pixel solid cyan so we can properly see it. And I'm going to set a width of 100%. Okay, that is about what we want. Then we want to do a display of flex, and we want flex direction of column, and if I can spell it correctly. And everything looks to be correct when at small screen sizes. Then we want to change the flex direction at big screen sizes. So right here I'm going to select .disneyland cards flex direction of row. Okay, that looks good. And then we're just going to add a little bit of a gap, probably just like 1 Cool. And then we should see how well that scales. And that looks pretty much perfect. And now we can also take away that cyan. Okay, now comparing the two websites, it looks pretty good. I'm just going to make the font size a little bit bigger at this big size because it looks like it has been increased by a little bit. So I'm going to make it 10% larger using rem. Okay, so now we continue, and as you can see, we have to fix this padding right over here because we have no padding. So I just have to enter card content, and then I'm going to do padding of 1 And if we look now, then we can see that it looks properly. And I'm also going to make this just a little bit bigger because it looks a bit bigger in the original one, the image. So I'm going to go right down here, and then I'm going to select the image inside of here. So let's see, it's this one. And I'm just going to do image that, and I'm going to set the width to, let's say, 500 pixels. Let's try that. That's way too big. Let's do 350. Okay, that looks also a bit too big. 300. Let's try that. Yeah, that looks cool. And I'm also going to add some more padding, so I'm going to do padding right, and let's do 3M. Okay, that looks better. And everything else looks pretty fine, so now we just gotta fix the footer because that's also messed up. So let's do that. Okay, so to fix this, we simply need to go right here in there, and I'm going to search up newsletter, and I'm going to change the width from 100 viewport widths to 100%. And it looks pretty nice. And maybe we should also set this to max width just to increase responsiveness. And we want to change this one so that it aligns in the middle. And I'm going to see it aligns in the middle about all the time, really. I think I'm just going to change this element completely. So I'm going to go social media, and I'm going to change this to center. And now it looks more correct. And let's just see how everything else looks. And yeah, I think that's pretty fine. Let's see how everything looks if I remove the borders. Okay, so I removed the borders and everything looks pretty good. Okay, so now we have another problem here. So the webpage looks pretty good, but this section doesn't stretch out fully to the edges. So to fix that, we just gotta go to shop, and as we can see, I set a width to 90%, so there's 5% space here and 5% space here. But what we really want is the space content, the shop content, to have that extra space right here. So now that fixes it, but then we also have this problem where this image stretches all the way to the edges, which we don't want. So I'm going to very quickly select that image using an attribute selector, and I'm going to set the width to 90%. And then also I'm going to do margin 0 auto, so that it distributes the margin, so that it centers it. Okay, now take a look at our web page. I think that everything is looking pretty goddamn good and responsive. So I'm going to take a look at it in desktop mode. And as you can see, things look pretty good. And you can, as I said, you can always tweak with the a bit with the sizes. But as a whole, I think everything looks good. There could be a bit more margin added. But everything more or less looks very good. We could add some margin here also. We could do that very quickly just because that is probably good. So I'm just going to add some margin here. Let's just do 2M. Okay, no, let's not do that. Let's instead go to newsletter. And let's do margin.top 2M. No, that is not either what I want. I want to take away this one. Then I want to go into shop. And then I want to select shop. And I want to do padding.bottom of 2M. Now that looks good. Let's just see though, because I don't know if you want that also when it is in the mobile view. And yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. And as you can see, pretty much everything looks good. But there are some minor details that I want to change just to make it really acceptable. So it's very tight right here. So I'm just going to go into Boba Fett content, and I'm going to add a gap of 1M. And firstly, I think we have to make it a display of flex. Wait, let me just look through here. Content. Yes, we could probably remove all of this, because, and then we could instead go up, and then we could put it here instead. Or I meant we could put it up here instead, and then we could just take away this one, and let's look at it now, and it looks a lot better. And then we could also go down, and all we really need to have done is just this line of code, and then it should still look properly, and now it looks good too on that device. And another thing I want to change is right here at the newsletter. If we look at something like the, I think it was the Galaxy Fold, you can see that it gets really tight and it doesn't really fit. So to fix that, I'm going to go into, let's see, I'm going to go into newsletter, and I'm going to set max width to 90%. Oh no, that was not what I meant to do. I'm going to text align center. And I'm also going to do padding of 0.5 m. Okay, cool. So now it should look good on every device. And then lastly, we also have a small problem here with the image. Right here, where it doesn't show the entire background image right here. And also I just noticed that the logo, or now everything looks fine. Okay, yeah, I know. We just need to fix this background image so that the entire background image is showing. Okay, so quickly before fixing the image, I just wanted to mention that I found that it seemed to be a bit more space here and a bit less space here. So to fix that, I removed the margin 0 auto, and as you can see, it will now move everything to the left. And then I will open the body tag, and I will do a max width of 100 viewport of the entire viewport width. Then I'm going to do a display of flex, and then justify content center, and now everything should be properly centered. So now let's fix the image. And so on fixing that image, all we have to do is change our height to minimum height, and then it fixes that image. And to be honest, I don't fully understand why it fixes that. Probably something, yeah, just minimum height makes things more responsive. If you know the answer, please comment it down. I just played around with it a bit, and it seemed to have fixed it. And now whilst we're changing that, I also noticed some problems here, so we can just add minimum height to all of these, and things should work much better. Okay, so I noticed some problem right here. So as you can see, it works pretty much good on all screen sizes. However, after we surpass the limit of 1600 pixels, things start to get really weird. And as you can see on the original page, it just kind of stays there. It doesn't get any bigger. So the problem is that we have set the minimum height to 42 viewport widths. So the height increases with the viewport width. So the viewport width increases, so therefore the height increases. But we don't want the width to increase anymore, or the height to increase anymore. We want it to stop right now. So instead of setting it to 42 viewport widths, instead we could just do some basic maths. And 0.42 times 1600 equals 672 pixels. So instead, if we set it to 672 pixels, then we should see that it stops sizing at this point. And then we also have to fix this later on. But right now we'll just fix this at the same for this one. Okay, so we need to do the resizing for other images, so I'm just playing around a bit to try to make it look good. Let's see if we can get this right. About there, looks good. Yeah, that seems about right. And now these images all scale really well. And the last thing we need to change is this one, I think. Yes, so I think this one is also relative to the viewport width. So I am just going to find that. Let's see, relative units. And no. Here, The width is set to 40 viewport width, so I'm instead going to set it to 40%, and it looks a bit smaller, so I'm going to change it to 50%, and now it looks okay. Maybe 40% was what it actually was supposed to be at. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to remove all the borders, remove this one, remove this one, remove this one. Hi. While experimenting a bit more, I found another problem, which was with very small screen sizes. So as you can see, if I was to go down very low, like around 300 pixels, things start to get really weird and really hard to read. Whilst if you look at the Disney page, you can see that things instead look much better, and you can scroll. Now you can't really do that because I don't know, but usually you can. So we gotta fix this. So how do we do it? Well, we add another media query, of course. So I'm going to do a media query for a max width of 250 pixels, which is where I think the page kind of breaks. As you can see, I think this is the minimum width before things start going crazy. So what we're going to do is that we're going to set the container, and we're going to give it a minimum width of 250 pixels. So we are saying things can't go any smaller than this, more or less. However, we also gotta fix the overflow, because after we do that, then things start to go kind of outside of the box. We gotta set the box. We're gonna say HTML and body, and we're gonna set overflow to scroll, so that when there's overflow, the user can simply scroll. Now you notice there is another error. You can see that it kind of clips through from both sides, and then you can't scroll to the left. So we need to go into the body, and we need to set justify content to flex start. And now you should see that it kind of scales down only from the right, and that we can scroll to the right. And now everything else looks pretty fine, although the movies looks very crammed. So we're just going to do .movies, and we're going to do a display of inline. And now the movies kind of get the space that they need. So now our web page is an absolute responsive beast. As you can see, it can scale up to incredibly big sizes. Let's see if we can do 3000 here. As you can see, very big sizes, very responsive. Here is the entire web page, but we can also scale this down, and everything will respond responsively and look very nicely all the way through, from the biggest of pages to a very small tiny page, and everything is incredibly responsive and working nicely. And we can look at this, and we can compare it with the original, and as you can see, it looks pretty sick and it's pretty responsive. So it's really nice. I hope that you've gotten some good practice with Flexbox container, and it's been so fun to be doing this. Now I'm going to do more of these types of tutorials. Right now I'm going to continue on with learning CSS grid. So if you want to see me do a tutorial on some other landing page or some other cool project, maybe some type of JavaScript game or something else, then please be one of my legendary subscribers and hit that red button down there, and so you can be part of my journey and follow along and learn to code with me. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.